Chief Meteorologist Tom Coombs here to talk about the heat, and summer heat is happening earlier in Michiana. I still haven't turned on the AC yet. I'll probably do that tomorrow, but it is going to be, well, probably a little warm tonight. We can get through that with lows still in the 60s, and the humidity won't be that extreme, but it's becoming more likely that we'll hit 90 in May than really ever before. Here's the forecast as we head towards the weekend. Normal high is 72. Now, I know the first half of the month was as equally cold extreme as now we're going warm extreme, or pretty close to it, as we're going to see 15 to almost 20 degrees above normal temperatures as we head towards the end of this week. So we've got something to put into perspective there. But we've seen this before. In fact, we saw this last year with warm weather to end the month of May. Humidity isn't all that extreme. In fact, it's a relatively dry heat, which is why even an 80-degree temperature won't be that hot, and maybe you can get by without the AC, or at least it'll be more tolerable than if the humidity were much higher. So it's a relatively dry heat, but it's definitely warm for this time of year. Looking at some facts, did some digging here. Last year, we hit 90 for the first time on May 26th. And last year we had 22 days of 90 or above. It was one of the hotter summers on record. We had mostly dry heat, though. We also had dry to early drought conditions last summer. Now, that was preceded by 5 years of very wet weather, but that's kind of the trade-off. When you're dry, you're usually hotter because the air is drier. The dry air heats up more. And the 30-year average, the first date, averages out for about June 7th. And that's something to really look into because that's the new climate period. It was just enacted 1991 to 2020, a 30-year climate period. Well, the old one that just expired, the average first date for 90-degree heat was June 12th. So we've moved this timeline up 5 days. That's pretty significant to do that over a decade, which means the last 10 years we have just seen earlier and earlier 90-degree heat to push that average earlier. It's pretty significant, and it's something that is more likely to happen. It's predicted by climate change, and this change in the normals, something to kind of talk about, and that we have talked about. And this is a prime example of that. We're seeing the normals get warmer. We have these normals, these 30-year climate periods that kind of tell us, well, this is what's expected now. This is what typically happens. What is extreme? What is not extreme? We can have record highs and record lows, but we kind of have a working average that we kind of know what is typical and what would be extreme or not. Just like right now, highs 20 degrees above normal would be fairly extreme, with highs near 90 degrees for this time of year. And we're seeing this shift towards the warmer across the board. Some parts of the country more than others, but this is definitely significant. And this all goes with climate change and the data that continues to come in, that even though last year many of us were at home and working from home or not traveling as much, still record high for CO2. And we can directly attribute the rise in carbon dioxide from the use of fossil fuels. I exhale CO2, so do you, so do all the animals. All that's accounted for. We're talking about the excess, the stuff that was once coal, that was once oil, that was buried and sequestered in the ground, that we've, well, burned and released. And this is that direct correlation. Again, you can see the rise in carbon dioxide and the rise in global temperatures. There is a direct correlation here. It lines up pretty much with the start of the Industrial Revolution and has only spiked as we continue to only accelerate the level of CO2 in the atmosphere, which is a greenhouse gas. And this is where we are. And this is why we're looking for new climate solutions, because, well, the last 100 years, CO2 has just skyrocketed. We go another decade, we're more likely to be pushing that heat even more and see the 90s even earlier, probably in May. So some things we can deal with, some things we have to plan for. But this is what climate change looks like. This is a moving of that average, even for us in somewhat of a buffered environment like Michiana, where we have Lake Michigan and even some cold snaps in May. We're still seeing that warming. Good news is that's climate for this week's weather. We deal with a little warm spell and then we'll return to more normal weather. But I do think, looking towards summer, I may be more concerned about drought, as hot, dry conditions may persist, and drought sometimes builds on more drought until we have a significant pattern change. Something to watch as we head into summer.